In this video we're dealing with the orientation of your iBook that you've created in iBooks Author for music education. So by default iBooks Author opens up files in landscape view. Landscape is when it's that way around, portrait is when it's the other way around, and when we've looked at that in our on our iPad, that's also the view that we've been looking at. However, I'm just going to turn my iPad now, and when I turn it here, it should also turn on the screen. And you'll see that the format is very different. We've only got one image there on the front page, and as I scroll down, with basically all of those interactive widgets that I've made, whether they are quizzes or scores or whatever, they're now only just teeny little icons. Now, tapping on any of those will indeed turn it to as close as full screen as possible, and you can see I've got a few different options here, so that's okay. But I mean, video doesn't really look that good that way around. If I turn my iPad back over, let's have a look. That looks much better that way because it fills much more of the screen. So that's not really ideal. Then let's just go down a little bit further. Same issue when we come to our score. We can play the score and change the pages, but they're not really very useful in that particular view. And so on and so forth. The quiz, I've got to tap on it again. You know, it's not quite as interactive. I'm still at the end of my incorrect answers here. So that's not really wonderful. We might actually want to insist, in fact, that the iBook is always read in the landscape view, which will ensure that it always has this very beautiful graphic layout, even though mine's a little cluttered because I've made it in a hurry for these demonstrations. But I think the presentation is much better. So either way, you want to actually consider that before you complete your iBook. In fact, you probably want to consider that fairly early on in the process. Remember, I showed you in an earlier video that if you click the orientation button, that does give you an idea of what the iBook is going to look like when the iPad is flipped over, just as we saw on the actual iPad screen. And again, we can now go back to landscape, and you can see that the pages scroll just like they will on the iPad as well. But what if you want to force it to always be landscape to keep the more beautiful layout? Well, it's quite easy to do. We've used the inspector so far mostly for editing widgets, but all of these buttons here on the inspector, I promise you, if there's ever you've got a day to spare and you use a lot of different Apple programs such as Pages and Keynote for word processing and making slideshows, then learn to use the document inspector. It really is, a lot of things can be achieved very quickly in these little context sensitive panels. And I'm just going to click on the very first tab of the document inspector, and you can see that one of the options that I have in here is disable portrait orientation. So if once that's tapped and I save the file and preview it, turning my iPad around won't make any difference. I won't do it now to save time on this video, but I can assure you that that's a fact. You can also see some interesting features in there, such as password protecting iBooks and things like that, which is quite useful as well. Anyway, that I think is something that you should consider fairly early on in your making your iBook, so that you can make sure that you get the layout just as you want it to appear.
So go